Okay, so on the review, we're going to go ahead and look at question number 5. And we had already figured out that the slope is 3. It goes up 3 grams for every penny that you add. And we found that our B, or our y-intercept, was 1, which means the starting amount or the tray weighed 1 grams. So in question D, it says write an equation. So you only need to know those 2 things to write a linear equation. And again, this is not exponential because it's going up by constant amount of the time. So y equals mx plus b, so your slope always goes by x, and then your standalone thing is your one-time thing. If you wanted to do, you could say something like weight equals 3 times pennies plus 1. So x is your number of pennies, and then w is your overall weight. So your input is how many pennies you have, output is the weight. But again, if you want to write it in this form, that's fine. So if you look at the next part then, they're going to give you the input because it says, okay, if you have 100 pennies, what would the weight be? So if I shove 100 in for my input, and again, you can just type this in a calculator and hit enter. You don't have to do order of op yourself. But if you did, it's going to be 301, and your output is weight, so that's grams. So the ordered pair, this is actually an ordered pair, like 100 for the input gives you an output of that. So your input is always your x, output's y, and in this case our x is pennies, but the output is grams in weight. All right, and then the next question, part F, they give you 34 grams. So this time they're giving you the output. So if your formula is this, input is penny, output is weight. So now I want to solve for x. All right, but notice there's adding in the problem. So again, you have to undo, add, and subtract before you can multiply or divide. So get your numbers on one side. Okay, and then when you do that, all the add and subtract is gone now. So now you can multiply or divide. So to get rid of multiplying by 3, divide. So x equals 11. So an input of 11 pennies is going to give you an output of that gram. So again, if I write that as an ordered pair, 11 is my input. Oops, sorry about that. 11 is my input, 11 pennies. My output is weight or grams. All right. Okay, pause and go ahead and do problem number 6, and I'll pick up with you there. Okay, so 6 to the negative second power. So remember, this tells you 2 things to do actually. The 2 tells you to square it, just like normal. That's not a big deal. The negative doesn't mean you have debt. It means to reciprocate or to flip it. So 6 squared is 36, and then you just flip it. Okay, so 1 over 36. So negative exponents just mean to reciprocate or to flip. Okay, go ahead and try 7. There's 2 equations on 7. And again, remember that you undo order of operations. So think about what you do if you knew x, and then how you do it backwards. So try 7 both parts. All right, so let's look at this first one. If I knew what x was, say I knew x was 24, I would sub x in first, and then I would add first. So add, and then after I added, then I would square root. So that's if I was going forwards. If I knew like x was 24, I'd add it, get 25, square root, and get an answer 5. Obviously, that's not the right answer. So I'm going to go backwards. So what that means is then, instead of square rooting last, I would have to square first. And then instead of adding first, I would have to subtract secondly or last. All right, so let's go ahead and do this math. So to get rid of the square rooting, I would square. So let me go ahead and square both sides. And squaring and square rooting undo each other. So they just cancel, and the x plus 1 comes out because the squaring and square rooting undo each other. On this side, 9 squared is 81. All right, so I've undone the squaring part. So now I have to undo the adding 1. So to get rid of adding 1, I have to do the opposite, which is to subtract 1, again, to both sides. So x equals 80. So basically undoing order of operations. I think this is my answer, but you know, I could be wrong. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to sub that x in right there. So I think x is 80. So let's sub that in. 80 plus 1 is 81. And the square root of 81 really is 9. And that's what it's supposed to be. So I'm happy. My answer checks. It works. Life is great. All right, let's look at order of op over here. If I knew what x is, I would like 10. I'd square 10. So I would square first. And then after I squared 10, I get 100. Then I'd add my 10 second. and get my answer, which would be 110, which obviously that's not right either. So I am going to go backwards. So instead of adding 10 last, I'm going to subtract 10. And to get rid of squaring, I'm going to square it. But I'm going to go backwards. So that means I have to start here. So I'm going to subtract my 10 first. So I get x squared equals 25. And then I'm going to square root second. Now, be careful when you square root. You actually get two answers. X, this cancel, squaring and square root and cancel. X equals plus or minus 5. So x is 5 or a negative 5, I think. Just remember, when you have an exponent of 2, you should expect 2 answers. Don't mess that up on the test. Okay, I'm going to check my answers. So 5. If I shove 5 in there, what do I get? 5 squared is 25, plus 10 is 35. That's awesome. But I also have to check my negative 5. So a negative 5 times a negative 5 is still 25. Add the 10, I still get 35. So both answers do work. And again, if you have an exponent, you should expect 2 answers. All right, go ahead and graph number 8. And then if you want to go ahead and write the slope and the y-intercept for 9, try those two. So try 8 and 9 both, and then I will come right back. Okay, so let's look at number 8, and we're going to graph. And there's a couple ways you can do this. So if you don't like using slope-intercept form, you can always make an input-output chart. And remember, input is independent variable. Output is your dependent variable. Remember this word ID. So you have control over the input. It's the output that's dependent. Now, if you're going to do that, see this denominator 4? If you want to avoid decimals and fractions, pick multiples of 4. So like 0, 4, 8, maybe a negative 4, negative 8. And you can just type those in your calculator. So like negative 3/4 times 0 minus 2, enter, and then get your answer. And then, or negative 3/4 times 4 minus 2, enter, and you're going to get your points. Negative 3/4 times 8 minus 2, enter, and it'll give you those, okay? And then at that point, you can just graph them and draw your line. The other way to graph is to do what we call slope-intercept form. So you're going to use the slope, which is a point creator, and you're going to do the y-intercept, which is your starting amount. So I'm going to start at a negative 2 on my y, which is right there. And then I'm going to use the definition of slope to create other points. So rise over run. Now, only one direction can be negative. So if I rise 3, 1, 2, 3, that's positive direction, then I have to run 4 backwards. So 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 4, and I got to run backwards. The other option, I don't necessarily want those, is to go down 3. So treat that as a negative 3. So if I go down 3, I might be off the screen here, 1, 2, 3, then that would be my negative direction because I went down. So then the other direction has to be positive, 2, 3, 4. Okay. And so I'm going to connect my dots and my line. And it better be negative, right? Like if someone's skiing on this, this should be a negative slope. Notice if I plot this point, 0, negative 2 is here. 1, 2, 3, 4, negative 5 should be that point down there. And I guess if I went back to negative 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, that should be up at a positive 1. So whether you make an input-output chart and use your calculator or whether you use the slope-intercept form, that's kind of up to you. All right, and then what was there? Oh, number 9. So let's see if I can scroll down and get some clean space here maybe a little bit. All right, so for number 9, we're looking for the y-intercept and the slope. So remember, the slope is always by the x. It doesn't matter the order. It has to be by the x. So in this problem, your slope is a negative 3. And your y-intercept is like the one-time fee. That's your starting amount. So y-intercept is 200, which on my math lab, I know they want you to write it as an ordered pair again. Okay, and if you write it in y equals mx plus b form, then, you know, it's in the order. Oopsie, not sure what happened there. There we are. Then it's in that form. Okay, it doesn't want to stay. But. All right, and then the other one is 2x plus, what is it? 2x plus y equals 8. All right, so I have 2x, maybe. All right, my pen's stuck. Okay, sorry about that. My pen froze and I couldn't write. Okay, so I have 2x plus y equals 8. says problems B are number 9. And I want the slope and the y-intercept. So notice it is not in y equals mx plus b format. There's no m in front of an x, and there's no standalone b. So I have to do some manipulation. So notice there's adding in here, which means to get rid of it, you have to use adding. You can't divide. That wouldn't make sense. So I want to keep the y, okay, because I want to get it in y equals form. So that means I'm going to have to use adding to get rid of the 2x. So I'm going to use adding a negative or subtracting it because I want to do the opposite. Positive 2x, negative 2x equals 0, which is good. And basically, I just moved that over to the other side, but when I added it to both sides, it had to be negative. So this is a negative 2x plus 8. All right, so now I can kind of tell what's going on. So my slope is always by my x, so my slope is a negative 2. And then the y-intercept is always the standalone amount. So my y-intercept is either 8, or if you write it as an ordered pair, 0, 8 would be your y-intercept. All right, go ahead and do 10a and b, convert into scientific notation. Okay, so these numbers are in what we call standard form, and we want to write them in scientific notation. So take the significant digits, and if there's 0 trapped between them, that holds place value. And we always put the decimal after the first digit, so that this number is between 1 and 9 point something or other. But you can't just change a number because you feel like it. So really what you're doing is multiplying or dividing by 10. So count your jumps, 1, 2, and then you have to decide, is this a positive exponent or negative exponent? So this is a tiny number, and tiny numbers are negative exponents. So make sure it's a negative 2. Now, if you want to check your answer, like on a calculator, you would take, number one, you could probably just type this in and enter and see what happens. Otherwise, think about what you're doing. Negative exponents really mean to flip, so it really means like you're dividing by 10 twice. So if you take 5.007, divide by 10, and divide by 10, that would move the decimal to equal that number, okay? And so you can check on your calculator if you would like. This one, take all your significant digits, put your decimal after the first digit. So this is between 1 and 9 point something. And then again, what moves the decimal is either multiplying by 10 or divide by 10. So count your jumps. Decimals are at the end of a number if they're not written. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Now, is it a positive 5 or negative 5? Well, this is a big number. This is bigger than 1, so definitely positive exponent. We don't want to divide by 10 over and over again. We want to multiply it. So if you want to check your answer, take what you have, so your 3.1802, and literally multiply it by 10 5 times because you have a positive exponent. That should move the decimal to the right 5 times, which makes it big. Okay, so you can check your answer just to make sure you're right on those. All right, pause and try the next problem. All right, the next one, number 11, part A, says find the slope. So I like to do an input-output chart. So input 2, output -4, input 10, and 12. And I like to look at like the kind of more the rate definition, like the change in y. This is going up by 16 over the change in x. This is going, what, up by 8. So change in y, 16 over 8 gives you 2. Or you could put 2 over 1 if you want. Reduce it, like divide by 8, simplify. All right, so the slope of this is 2. Another way to do that is you need to remember the formula y2 minus y1, x2 minus x1. So if you start here, then you have to subtract this number. But remember, there's a subtraction in between there. So 12 minus a -4. And then you have to start back over here, 10 minus 2. Notice you're going to have to add the opposite or use your calculator or something. That should be 16 over 8, which also reduces to 2. All right, so go ahead and find the distance between those, and I'll come right back. Okay, so if you use the original numbers before you reduce, those are going to be your sides A and B on your triangles. So like this is 16, this is 8, and you can just do Pythagorean theorem. So don't use the reduced one because that's going to be a baby triangle. So 8 squared plus 16 squared is always going to give you C squared. 64 plus, what is it, 256 equals C squared. Add those together and square root, so you get, what, 320 square root, and so that should give you that this is about 17.9. If you want to remember the distance formula, that's fine, but these are just your distances on Pythagorean theorem.